Settlements. A place where people live. Settlements don't have to be permanent, they can also be temporary. They aren't specific to any particular size or importance, meaning they can range from a small house like this to big cities like these. Settlements are so important to us. Without them, life would be completely different. They are vital to our species. They provide protection from the elements and predators, allow us to unite, motivating people to work for a common cause. They're the building blocks of civilization. Without settlements, we wouldn't see the social, economic, and technological developments we see in today's world. What's so amazing and fascinating about human settlements is that they are vastly different around the world. Culture, geography, and resources all dictate the purpose, appearance, and size of these crucial parts of our lives. So, where did they begin, and how have they changed over time? Two questions that I'm sure you're asking yourselves. I certainly have. Let's begin. A settlement can't just be a place where people sleep. It must have some sort of construction that allows a community to stay together, even if it's just a series of tents or simple walls to protect the group. So, for the sake of this video, we won't be considering caves as settlements, unless there is a clear sign of construction within it. This makes things very difficult when trying to find when humans started building settlements, because materials that our ancestors used 100,000 years ago, like wood and fibres, are awful at preserving. We simply just rarely find these perishable materials in the archaeological record, even though we are almost certain that we have been using materials like wood for hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of years. Our journey begins at Kalambo Falls in Zambia, where archaeologists discovered two logs dating to roughly 476,000 years old. You may be asking yourself, how are two logs signs of a settlement? If you've already watched my video on these wonderful logs, then you would already know. But if you haven't, I'll quickly go over the key points here, and if you want a bit more detail, make sure to watch that video after this one. Now, these aren't just any old logs. These are evidence of potentially the world's oldest known wooden structure. How do we know this? Well, the logs show clear signs of being worked, that's for sure. Signs of adzing and scrape marks to shape the wood show this. You might rightfully say, well, okay, how do we know that these logs were used in construction? One log can be seen lying down with the top part running under the second log. The second log seems to have a notch carved into its underside, allowing it to nestle comfortably on the top of the bottom log. Notching has been used in construction for thousands of years and is used to create a firm connection between two pieces of material. Kalambo Falls experienced many floods during the construction of these logs, so archaeologists think that it may have been part of some sort of raised platform, walkway, or foundations for a home. If this is true, then human settlements were being constructed before our species even evolved. So, were these logs at Kalambo Falls actually the first human settlements? We simply just don't know. Unless more evidence is discovered detailing the purpose of the logs, then we can't say for sure. Regardless, it is still a fascinating find. Settlements through history have changed drastically around the world. From the war camps of the Zulu, centered around the sacred cattle that the tribe relies upon, to the giant cities of the Mayans, rich with serpentine monuments and statues. We can tell a lot about a community of people and their lifestyle just from their settlements. One group of people that we can learn a lot about how settlements are influenced by our lifestyle are the Native Americans. The original inhabitants of the Americas didn't just roam what is now North America, but lived as far south as southern Chile and as far north as Greenland. The extreme environments that North and South America are home to forced these people's lifestyles to vary massively, and this affected these people's settlements. For me, when I picture the Native American lifestyle, I picture teepee tents and tracking giant herds of bison across the plains of America. In actual fact, this sort of lifestyle was only adopted by a small number of Native American tribes that lived on the plains, known as Plains Indians, and later changed when the Spanish colonists reintroduced horses to the country. Some of the most famous of these tribes were the Comanche, Cheyenne, and the Blackfeet. Before the arrival of the European settlers, many tribes on the North American plains were relatively settled hunters and farmers. These hunting and farming tribes were living in settlements comprising of a number of large earth-berm homes, which is typical of a community who mostly stay in one place. Earth-berm homes are also known as earth shelters and are one of the oldest forms of buildings in our history. They come in all shapes and sizes, with some of the most primitive versions popping up around 17,000 years ago. It is thought that the majority of hunters in Europe were using turf and earth to insulate simple round huts that were also sunk into the ground. Some of these Native American villages that constructed earth-berm homes reached populations of up to a few thousand people. These groups, known as Plains village cultures, grew corn, beans, squash, and sunflowers in the easily tiled land along the river bottoms. When these people would go out hunting, they would utilize packs of domesticated dogs to carry cargo across the plains. Among the items brought on these hunting trips were teepees. Teepees are a conical tent that are historically made of animal hides or pelts on a framework of wooden poles. Teepees were easy to pack up and move compared to the much larger earth lodges that were used at the more permanent settlements. However, after contact with the Spanish, many of these tribes acquired horses, which would change their lifestyle and therefore their settlements. Natives living on the plains became much more nomadic, now becoming more reliant on hunting than farming, meaning they would pack up and move camps more frequently. The previously favoured earth-berm homes became less common, as these tribes were forced to flee from their lands and live life on the move. This, of course, had a massive impact on their settlements. Most tribes now living on the move were unable to expand their existing settlements. Instead, they relied on camps that were light and easy to pack up and move. Some tribes even camped without fire in order to avoid the colonists tracking their movements. It is only because these events happened a few hundred years ago, during a time where writing existed, and these light perishable materials could be preserved, that we have any idea about how these people lived. So while I was editing this video, I found an absolutely amazing site that I thought was definitely worth adding into the video, hence the camera in front of me. And this site is called Poverty Point, and it's an amazing site because it tells us a lot about how we can find the first settlements and how difficult it is to find and identify the first settlements. And the main reason for that is the lack of hard materials at the site, such as stone, used to make walls, structures, so on and so forth. And Poverty Point shows us that these sites could be hiding in front of our very eyes because stone wasn't used in their construction. They are very hard to identify and they are very hard to find. Poverty Point is located in northeastern Louisiana, and it is an earthworked site. So that means that the people there worked the earth to create various mounds, C-shaped mounds and mounds resembling animals, and quite large mounds too are found there. The construction of Poverty Point happened through phases. It was built roughly about 3,800 years ago. Well, at least that's when construction roughly started. And it was built over phases through to about 3,200 years ago. So this site was influential to the local people because it was built over generations, hundreds of years we're talking about, you know. Someone's great-great-grandfather started building the site, and, you know, this guy's great-great-grandson is continuing to build the site. So this was influential to the local people. The builders of the site were Native Americans, and these people were hunter-fisher-gatherers. There is no evidence of agriculture at the site, so this is a pre-agricultural settlement, which I understand now there are plenty of pre-agricultural settlements out there, but this is, you know, put into that box with the rest of those settlements that we didn't need agriculture to settle down in one spot. And in fact, at Poverty Point, they did this for generations. They did this for hundreds of years without any agriculture. And there's a site that I'll talk about later that's even older than Poverty Point that that doesn't have evidence of agriculture, or I think it actually does have a tiny little bit of agriculture there, but it's very, very early agriculture. And I just want to mention quickly that just because these people didn't have agriculture, it doesn't mean they didn't have an understanding of how things grow in their environment. But the facts are that they were hunting various animals, gathering from the environment, and hunting lots and lots of fish. Like I mentioned, the site is made up of entirely earthworks. Any other material that was used is since decomposed, which leaves some debate about what the site was actually used for. 78 tons of rocks and minerals were found at the site, and these weren't local to the site. They were exported from over 800 miles away. That's 800 miles each way on a journey. So why did they make this journey? Well, stone is vital to people all around the world, and it was no different to the people at Poverty Point. These people needed stone for tools, jewellery, there's stone bowls there. So stone is vital for people and has been for millions and millions of years. We wouldn't be able to harvest various resources and defend ourselves properly if it wasn't for stone. So that's why they made this journey. There is no stone local to Poverty Point. So they made this journey over 800 miles away to gather stone, or did they? This is suggested to some people that Poverty Point was a centre of a huge trade network of various tribes in the surrounding area, which is a cool idea, but there's no evidence to suggest that, apart from that stone has been taken from miles and miles away. So trade may have been going on, not really supported heavily by evidence. Who's to say that these people weren't travelling 800 miles on a big expedition, you know, working stone at the site, or bringing back unworked stone and working it at Poverty Point? The reality of what the site was used for is probably a mixture of things. So it may have been used as a trade network. It was probably used as a ceremonial site, but it was almost definitely and first and foremost used as a home to the people that built the site. And we know this because we found evidence of wooden poles being erected into the ground around the site, various wooden poles that are typical of earth-boom homes. So the wooden pole in the middle would have been used to, you know, keep everything from collapsing down in on you. And that's typical of an earth-boom home, and we find various versions of those at the site. So it was definitely used by at least some people at some point in its construction as a home. And this suggests that it's a settlement. You know, various settlements around the world, even today, they're not just homes. They have, you know, shops and things like that, which is a trade network, and they have ceremonial things like churches and sites and different structures, which are the mounds, potentially, because the mounds don't have any evidence of structures being erected on top of them, or seashells, which are typical of other Native American mounds. So these mounds were probably used for, you know, some sort of symbol of power, maybe a religious symbol. You know, some of the mounds, they do resemble animals. I think one looks like a bird. So yeah, of course there's going to be some ceremonial structures there. It doesn't mean it's only solely a ceremonial site. people like to live next to these ceremonial sites. So yeah, it was a settlement, almost certainly a settlement. But the main reason I wanted to actually bring it up was this thought I had about it. Poverty Point was constructed using stone tools, and the site wasn't actually found until stone artifacts in the area were first found. This site was giant. It housed up to 5,000 people. Some estimates can go that high, but it may have been a few hundred people. So this site was massive. So there was lots of stone artifacts, lots of people living there, and it was occupied for over 500 years. So it was a big site. So there was lots of stone artifacts in the ground and in the surrounding area, and that's how the site was found. These stone artifacts were found by archaeologists, and they were typical of a dwelling area, so they decided to survey the area. They found the mounds, cleared the area, so on and so forth. But think about sites that may be tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands years older. These would of course probably be smaller scale, so they wouldn't house hundreds of people. They probably house 20, 30, 50, maybe even 100. These sites also may have not been erected for as long, 2-3 generations as opposed to over 10. The stone artifacts at the site, like tools, bowls, jewelry, wouldn't be as abundant, and because of that, the site may have never been found. It may still be in the ground, and the earthworks, they sort of mold into the environment, especially in a forest or jungle or anywhere like that. They sort of mold into the environment, so you wouldn't find a site just by spotting earthworks. It just looks like a hill. So how many of these sites are out there in the world that may be 50, 100,000 years old, 20, 30,000 years old? We don't know. And that's what I'm trying to say. Poverty Point was constructed using stone tools. I understand that the stone tools had a more advanced method of being made, and they had more variety of stone tools used for different things and specific jobs. But stone tools were pretty advanced by the time Homo Sapiens evolved. And even some of our cousins, such as Neanderthals, had pretty advanced stone tools. Who's to say that Neanderthals may have not been building sites, like I mentioned earlier, that are somewhere in the world, 50 people for 2-3 generations? That may have happened. That's pure speculation. There's no evidence to support that. What I would like to also bring up is the Kalambo Falls site. Now this site is over 400,000 years old, so this is exactly what I'm talking about, to a point, to a T. The only thing that's stopping us pushing back settlements to that date is that we don't exactly know what the logs were used for. It's clear that humans worked the logs. It is clear that these were some sort of structure. But what were they used for? Is it a settlement? Or is it something that was just used for hunting? A trap, maybe? We don't know. We don't know. And that's the problem. If Kalambo Falls was home to a settlement, that would mean that settlements were being erected and people were living in one spot before Homo Sapiens even evolved. Now this changes everything, because previously we thought that people, especially archaic humans, were living on the move constantly. They were living a hunter-gatherer nomadic lifestyle. But maybe Kalambo Falls suggests differently. Maybe it suggests that in certain parts of the world where, prey and plant life was abundant, people didn't need to be nomadic. People could just stay in one spot. And this, of course, has massive results for culture. And Poverty Point, it helps point out that people may have been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years. And it's really difficult to find the first settlement. And obviously, the settlements I talk about in this video aren't actually the first settlements. We don't know what the first settlements are. But without further ado, let's just go on to some of the oldest settlements in the world and the evidence we have, the concrete evidence we have for the oldest settlements in the world and where we know it all began. In Turkey, the discovery of an 11,400-year-old monumental site as one of the world's oldest villages has challenged our understanding on the first human settlements. Labelled Karahantepe, the site is an amazing example that humans could and did build settlements without agriculture, and they lived there all year round for about 1,500 years. The site is only 35 kilometers from the famous Göbekli Tepe and is actually a few thousand years older than it. Karahantepe is predicted to be between 1 and 5% excavated, which means we don't know much about this place. As well as various circular homes, it has culturally important buildings, such as the chamber that contains 11 giant phalluses, watched over by a bearded head with a serpent's body. Karahantepe also has various drainage channels leading into the settlement, which is a prime example of how important natural resources like water were to the location and infrastructure of the settlement. We must remember that the landscape in southern eastern Turkey wasn't always as arid as it is today. Around the area are dozens of ancient dried up rivers which show evidence that this area was a prime spot for people to settle. The discovery of Karahantepe means that hunter-gatherers were so much more sophisticated than we previously thought. Finds like obsidian tools may just give us an insight into just how successful these people were. There is no obsidian within 200 miles of the area, yet we find obsidian tools at the site. These people were so advanced that they were able to go on long campaigns across the country to collect and process raw material. Or maybe they didn't travel the distance and process the material. Instead, maybe they traded for it. Around Karahantepe are roughly 11 sites who seem to share a similar culture. Signs of shared culture lie within the presence of the T-shaped pillars and similar, perhaps religious, carving. What a wonderful thought it is to think that these people over 10,000 years ago already began to settle and decorate their homes, forming small communities and interacting with neighbouring communities around them. Truly fascinating. Now, what if I was to tell you that even though the people at Karahantepe weren't farming, agriculture had already emerged 10,000 years before these people settled down in what is now Israel? It was previously believed that agriculture began to emerge roughly 12,000 years ago, but with the discovery of sites like Ohalo 2, that's been pushed back even further. At Ohalo 2, we find signs that agriculture started way before then, roughly 22,000 years ago. The people living at Ohalo 2 were definitely living a hunter-gatherer fishing lifestyle, but they were also growing cereals. These included wild emmer, wild barley, and wild oats. Ohalo 2 is located on the southwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee in Israel, at 212 to 213 meters below mean sea level. It was submerged during most of its history and even most of the 20th century. Since 1989, during 7 non-successive years of severe drought and heavy pumping from the lake, the water level dropped far enough to expose the site and permit excavation. During excavation, archaeologists found the remains of 6 brush huts that had apparently burnt down in antiquity. The floors of 4 brush huts were fully excavated, whereas 2 others were largely sampled. All were rich with food remains, bones, seeds, fruits, and flint-knapping debris, and were clearly distinct from the surrounding fine-grained lacustrine stone-free deposits. Near the huts, 6 concentrations of open-air hearths were exposed. Each concentration included the remains of several hearths, sometimes partially overlapping. This phenomenon indicates that in each of these locations, fires were used at different times. Therefore, we can assume that camp life included cooking and other fire-related activities in specific open-air locations. Typical debris of food preparation and flint working was common near most hearths. More than 8,000 mammal bones were studied, most of those belonged to gazelles. There are also bones of fallow deer, fox, and hare, among others. Bird bones belonging to 80 different species were identified, with waterfowl being the most common. The range of bird species represents at least 3 seasons of occupation. The bones found in greatest abundance at the site belonged to small fish. This shows that their diet appeared to be based on a combination of fishing, hunting, and gathering of a wide range of species on a year-round basis. The site was also occupied for generations, with occupation dating between roughly 24 and 22,000 years ago. So what does this tell us? Well, what we can see here is that in order to settle down in one spot, people didn't necessarily need agriculture. Like we discussed earlier, an abundance and variety of wild animals and plant life supported the people at Karahantepe, allowing them to construct this impressive settlement. At Ohalo too, it was an abundance of wild animals, fish, plants, and very, very early domesticated crops that allowed these people to settle for generations. Not only were these hunter-gatherers able to settle down in one spot, they were also able to flourish and develop culturally significant buildings like at Karahantepe and probably Göbekli Tepe. Knowing this, the possibilities for even earlier permanent human settlements increases. Who knows, maybe some humans were living in permanent settlements long before our species evolved. Perhaps the site at Kalambo Falls is the remains of one of these. With new and amazing discoveries being made every year, it feels like only a matter of time before the picture becomes clearer.